In the summer of 2013, when the alpine meadows of the Uncompahgre wilderness were still wet with melting snow, 36-year-old wilderness guide Mara Elling packed her truck in Boulder and told her sister she needed 3 days of quiet before the season starts. It wasn't unusual for Mara to seek solitude. She'd spent most of her adult life mapping backcountry trails, guiding tourists up 14ers, and teaching novices how to read a landscape by the way the wind moved through spruce needles. She was responsible, cautious, deeply experienced. One of those people rangers trusted instinctively. But in the weeks before she left, her sister noticed something different. Mara had become increasingly withdrawn, waking at odd hours, stepping outside at night to listen. When asked what she was doing, she'd answer with a strange softness. The forest sounds different lately, like it's remembering something. Her family chalked it up to stress. On June 18th, she checked into a small lodge in Lake City. The owner, who had known her for years, recalled that she looked tired but focused. She bought a new topographical map of the Cataract Gulch region, 2 energy packets, and a replacement sheath for her belt knife. Before going to bed, she spent nearly an hour sitting on the porch staring toward the dark ridge lines. The next morning at 06:42, she signed the register at the Cataract Gulch trailhead. The trail camera captured her smiling at another hiker as she scribbled a short note beneath her name. Back Friday. If not, the mountains are teaching. She shouldered her pack, adjusted the strap across her chest, and headed up the switchbacks. It was the last confirmed moment of her life for the next decade. At noon, another hiker noticed her Subaru parked neatly in the dirt lot. Everything was orderly. Keys tucked in the cup holder, wallet zipped inside the console, journal placed cleanly on the passenger seat. Her sat phone, fully charged, sat beside it. Nothing indicated panic, departure, or struggle. When she didn't return by Friday evening, the lodge's owner made the first call. By dawn the next day, search teams were deployed. Dogs caught her scent easily at first, weaving through the marshy edges of the trail. But at a rockslide field about a mile from the ridge, the trail evaporated, as if she'd stepped into a pocket of vanished air. Search crews combed the canyon walls, the drainages, the old mining cuts. They found nothing, no dropped gear, no broken vegetation, no shredded clothing. The weather remained stable all week, giving every advantage to rescuers. Yet the mountains stayed silent. Only one person reported something unusual. A retired forest worker camping near the timberline claimed he heard a woman's voice late on the second night, not yelling, not begging, talking. Softly, rhythmically, like reciting a story to someone who wasn't answering. But the sound drifted on the wind, direction indeterminate, and by morning he had convinced himself it was echo. On day 5, a small team discovered a strange detail, a young aspen with a vertical cut down the trunk, as if something sharp had peeled part of the bark back. Beneath it, the wood had been smoothed unnaturally. The rangers marked it, unsure if it mattered. They found 2 more trees with similar markings within 50 yards. But without context, it seemed meaningless. By day 7, the official search was scaled back. The sheriff's report was careful, technical, unemotional. No evidence of foul play, no indicators of wildlife involvement. Probable environmental disappearance. Her family refused to accept it. Mara was meticulous. She didn't take risks. She never left marked trails unless she logged coordinates. But summer turned to fall. Snow began covering the high country. The case went cold. Over the next decade, Mara's name drifted into the long, heavy list of Colorado's unsolved wilderness disappearances, the ones that hikers mention in low voices around campfires, the ones no one talks about too loudly in the dark. Rangers still remembered her, though. They remembered her confidence, her maps, her easy calm. And some remembered the way she used to pause at the edge of old-growth aspens and place her hand on the bark, saying, "These ones grow rooms inside themselves. Not big enough for people, but sometimes it feels like they could be." No one knew then how close she was to the truth. No one imagined where she really was. And no one expected that after 10 silent years, she would return, smiling, wild-eyed, and curled inside a hollowed-out tree like she had grown there. On October 3rd, 2023, the mountains were quiet in a way that felt wrong. The aspen leaves had already turned, forming pale gold curtains across Cataract Gulch, the same region where Mara vanished 10 years earlier. Two wildlife biologists, part of a seasonal beetle spread research team, were conducting a routine drone sweep along a slope known for dense deadfall and unstable root systems. The footage captured nothing unusual at first, just waving treetops, a fallen trunk, a clearing of yellowed grass. Then, at the Ice-21, the drone operator paused. Something white was visible inside an aspen ring, a cluster of trunks fused at the base forming a natural bowl. At first it seemed like an animal carcass, pale, curved, but the shape didn't match any animal native to the area. And the way the surrounding bark peeled outward, like ribs opening, was unnatural. They zoomed in, a face stared back, motionless, eyes open, a faint, fixed smile stretched across cracked lips. Within an hour, sheriff's deputies and a rescue medic were climbing through the thick underbrush toward the coordinates. Body cam footage later reviewed by investigators shows the moment they reached the aspen ring. The trunks bent outward, forming a dark cavity at the center, smooth on the inside, polished like a bowl. The medic whispered, "How did it grow like this?" But nothing about it looked grown. It looked carved. Inside, curled upright with her knees drawn to her chest, sat a woman, emaciated, hair tangled into ropes, cheeks hollowed like cave walls. Her feet were bare, blackened with soil. Her clothing consisted of stitched strips of bark fiber and shredded cloth, layered crudely like an improvised skin. Her arms were covered in long, parallel scars, clean, deliberate, symmetrical. She did not flinch when they approached. She only lifted her head slightly and tilted it, as if listening to something behind them. Not them. When Sergeant Hallbrook crouched and asked gently, "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She reacted with a slow turn of her eyes. Her smile deepened. A whisper came out, hoarse and almost childlike. "The tree kept me. The tree waits." The medic stepped back instinctively. When they attempted to help her out of the cavity, she resisted, not violently, but with a rigid, rooted stillness, pressing her hands against the smooth bark as if afraid the curved walls would vanish if she let go. They lifted her gently, and her body sagged with dangerous fragility. Her temperature was dangerously low, pulse weak, but her eyes, alert, darting, followed every shadow. Her hands kept making small circular motions in the air, mimicking the inner curve of the cavity she had lived in. At the hospital in Durango, nurses struggled to give her water. She refused the cup, turning her face away as if the object offended her. But when a nurse accidentally spilled a few drops onto a piece of wooden railing, she leaned forward and licked the moisture from the grain like it was instinct. When they transferred her to a bed with metal rails, she grew agitated and curled back into the same contorted position she'd been found in. Then came the identification. Inside her fingerprint file at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation was a name most deputies on the scene didn't know. But older rangers never forgot. Mara Elling, missing since June 19, 2013. Her sister collapsed when she got the call. Is she alive? Yes. What happened to her? Silence. Back at the discovery site, investigators documented the tree cavity. The inner surface was disturbingly smooth, too smooth to be natural. The fibers had been scraped, shaped, and polished. On the interior walls were tiny carvings, triangles, circles, and small human figures drawn in a crouched posture. Hundreds of them, some shallow, some deep, forming spiraling patterns up toward the opening. The bark had been peeled outward in a way that required considerable force or tool work, but no tools were found. More disturbing, there were no footprints around the cavity except her own. No signs of a camp, no remains of food, no fabric scraps. Nothing to indicate where she had lived, how she had fed herself, or how she had survived winters in one of the harshest alpine regions in Colorado. When detectives asked her in the hospital how she survived, she didn't answer directly. She only whispered, "He showed me the hollow. He said the roots remember shapes." Doctors wrote that she smiled constantly, but the expression was closer to a fixed grimace, a somatized smile often seen in extreme trauma survivors who were conditioned to appear calm under threat. She began repeating a phrase whenever anyone mentioned the aspen cavity. The shell was safe. The shell closed. In the coming days, as specialists analyzed bark fragments and soil taken from the cavity, they would discover something far more unsettling. Things that had been living in the dark long before Mara was placed there. But for now, in sterile hospital light, curled like a child and smiling at things no one else could see, Mara Elling waited in silence. Her decade of missing years had finally returned, and every sign suggested she had not been alone. For the first 48 hours in the psychiatric medical unit in Grand Junction, Mara Elling barely spoke. Yet she was never still. Nurses documented her behavior in meticulous clinical notes. She traced curved shapes in the air with her fingers, curled her body into a steep crescent, and pressed her palms outward against invisible walls as if mapping a rounded surface only she could feel. Doctors recognized it immediately: confinement posture memory, a phenomenon seen in long-term captivity victims who lived in physically restrictive spaces for months or years. But Mara's case was different. Her postures were too precise, her motions too rhythmic, almost rehearsed. On the third day, a nurse placed a notebook on her bedside table. Within minutes, Mara slid toward it like metal pulled to a magnet. Her hands, shaking but controlled, began drawing rapid dark arcs across the page. When staff examined it, the sketches startled even veteran forensic psychologists. She had drawn a perfect oval chamber, ribbed with lines representing wood grain. Inside it, a human silhouette curled into a fetal crouch. Above the chamber, written in jagged handwriting, "The shell is the second body." More drawings followed, always the same curved interior, always the same claustrophobic geometry. And in several of those drawings, there was a tall figure standing outside the cavity, arms elongated, face indistinct. Beneath it, she wrote a single phrase: "The hollow man watches the curve." Doctors initially dismissed this as hallucination, a composite of trauma and folklore. But when detectives reviewed Mara's old journals from before her disappearance, they found references to the same phrase. A ranger she met in the San Juan Mountains once told her about the Hollow Man, a local piece of forest folklore about a hermit who carved shelters inside trees for chosen hikers. A legend, a story, nothing more. But Mara's drawings were too consistent, too deliberate. She never looked at her sketches as she made them. Her hand moved as though tracing memory, not imagination. A neurologist noted that her motor control was near perfect, despite starvation. Her lines were clean, straight, and intentional. Meanwhile, forensic teams were delivering results from the tree cavity where she was found. The interior wood was coated in a thin layer of human skin cells, far too many, far too old, to belong solely to Mara. Under the top layer of bark, forensic botanists identified microabrasions indicating repeated scraping over years. Much deeper in the fibers were biological traces from at least 2 additional people, likely decades old. The tree had grown over some of it, sealing layers of biological residue inside its rings. The forensic report's final line read, "This cavity was occupied long before the known victim." That prompted an expanded search. Investigators canvassed the forest around Cataract Gulch and found 2 more tree hollows within a kilometer. Both had collapsed naturally, their structures partially rotted, but the pattern was unmistakable. Each featured rib-like bark openings and smooth interior walls shaped by human hand. One still contained bits of shredded clothing, wool fabric from the late 1990s, and a single rusted belt buckle. Mara's case was no longer a solitary survival miracle. It was evidence of a pattern. While the search teams documented the forest, Mara's behavior inside the clinic intensified. She refused all synthetic bedding and would only rest on the wooden therapy bench in the corner of her room. When staff tried to move her, she clawed at the wood with quiet desperation. One night, nurses found her lying beneath the bench, curled tightly, whispering, "The curve keeps the breath slow." She flinched violently at metal sounds, but calmed instantly when presented with objects made of natural wood. Doctors speculated this was due to sensory conditioning, long-term captivity inside organic material shaping her survival responses. But the most disturbing development appeared on the 4th night. At 3:17 a.m., a nurse performing rounds saw Mara sitting by the window. staring out at the silhouettes of leafless trees beyond the hospital courtyard. Her smile was fixed, stretched almost painfully. She raised her hand and pressed her fingertips to the glass, then tapped 5 times in slow rhythm. When the nurse asked what she saw, Mara whispered, "He peeled the first tree. He taught us the stillness. He said the roots remember shapes." The nurse reported the statement to detectives. That same day, a forensic ecologist examining bark fragments noticed something chilling. The cavity in which Mara was found had been carved from the inside out, not the outside in. That meant someone had hollowed the tree while living inside it, scraping and shaping the interior core until only a thin curved shell remained. This kind of work required patience, skill, and an understanding of tree physiology. It also required the person inside to be alive during the carving process. Investigators began reviewing old ranger logs for anyone who had both the knowledge and the seclusion to perform such work. One name appeared repeatedly in disciplinary files from the late 1990s. Jonah Reeve, former forest ranger, fired for misconduct, vanished in 1998. His old case notes described him as obsessed with arboreal structures and convinced that trees grow rooms for people who listen. Detectives requested a full background check. Meanwhile, Mara filled page after page of her notebook with a single phrase: "The shell closed. The shell kept us." And beneath it, drawn with chilling precision, the tall, faceless figure standing at the cavity's opening. The hollow man. The one she said carved the tree. The one she said taught her how to smile when afraid. When detectives pulled the personnel file on Jonah Reeve, the mood inside the Lada County Command Office changed instantly. His name had been buried in old disciplinary reports, half-forgotten complaints from hikers, notes from supervisors who tried to describe behavior they didn't have language for. But now, in the context of Mara's drawings in the carved tree shells, every line hit with the weight of revelation. Reeve had been hired as a forest ranger in 1987. 1987. By all accounts, he was quiet, self-sufficient, skilled with terrain, and unnervingly comfortable spending months alone in the backcountry. His colleagues described him as strange but harmless until the mid-90s, when a series of incidents triggered concern. 3 hikers reported that Reeve led them off marked trails during guided walks, encouraging them to listen to the hollow places and feel the inside of the trees. One claimed he'd taken her to a stand of ancient aspens and asked her to put her ear against the bark to hear the second breath. Another said he drew diagrams in the dirt, curved chambers, arched roots, shapes disturbingly similar to the sketches Mara now drew in the clinic. The tipping point came in 1998 when a woman hiking alone told rangers she encountered Reeve deep in an unmarked grove. According to her statement, he stood between 2 peeling aspens and told her, "Trees can swallow the willing. The shell keeps the worthy." She reported him. He was fired. 2 months later, he vanished. His cabin was found abandoned, the bed stripped, his belongings stacked neatly on the table. On the wall above his wood stove, drawn in charcoal, was the same oval tree chamber Mara had been sketching. Detectives now saw what they missed decades earlier. Reeve hadn't disappeared. He had moved deeper into the wilderness, into the very region where Mara had vanished in 2013. The discovery of Reeve's old notebooks confirmed everything investigators feared. They were found inside a moss-covered shelter hidden beneath an overhang, so expertly camouflaged that search teams walked past it twice before a thermal sweep picked up residual warmth. Inside, bundles of bark fiber, crude stone tools, wood shavings, and 5 notebooks filled with uneven handwriting. The pages were a mixture of rambling philosophy and perfectly detailed technical diagrams. The tree grows a vessel. The shell is a second skin. Stillness teaches the bones to remember. The hollower must carve from the inside. Patience is the sharpest blade. Forensic botanists later confirmed Reeve's diagrams matched actual carving patterns inside the shell where Mara was found. He had developed a method of hollowing trees while keeping them alive, scraping them from within over long periods, shaping the cavity slowly, allowing the tree to regrow around the wound. He didn't cut cages into the trees, he grew them. The notebooks also contain names, 6 of them, each written on a separate page: L. Warren, disappeared in 1895. O. Mannix, disappeared 1997. R. Kessinger, last seen 1994. Nemdi Bromley, missing hiker, case unsolved. The boy with the green coat, unidentified juvenile, mid-90s. And last, in darker ink, Mara Elling, 2013. Next to each name, Reeve wrote a single symbol, a small human figure curled beneath a curved canopy. Detectives now understood the carvings in the trees, tiny crouched silhouettes marking victims. The search expanded again. Teams found a second tree shell, collapsed, charred at the edges, interior smooth like bone. Another was discovered on a steep slope, crushed under decades of snowpack, its opening partially preserved. Inside was a scattering of small bones, later confirmed as belonging to a woman in her 20s, likely deceased sometime in the late 1990s. Reeve had been doing this for decades, unnoticed, each victim buried inside living wood. But the most important discovery came from a ranger station archive box, taped shut since 1999. Inside was a field report written by Reeve himself. In it, he described a natural hollow he found in an aspen grove. A perfect shell, he wrote, grown around nothing, waiting to be filled. Investigators returned to that grove with updated coordinates. What they found there forced the FBI to join the case. It was a circle of ancient aspens, each trunk split in a vertical seam, each interior smoothed and carved with spiraling symbols, circles, roots, silhouettes. One cavity was only half finished. The bark peeled outward like a mouth mid-speech. Another was completely sealed over by thin bark regrowth, forming a swollen mound on the tree's side. Inside that mound, thermal imaging detected a cold void, the remnant of a chamber once occupied. The forest had grown over it. For the first time, agents confronted the horrifying scale. Reeve had built a hidden network of tree shells, some decades old, some collapsed, some sealed, some still half-carved. A map reconstructed from Mara's sketches and Reeve's notebooks suggested as many as 12 shells may exist across a 4-mile radius. And Reeve himself was still missing. No grave, no remains, no sign of death. But the way Mara whispered about him, he peeled the first tree. He taught us how to breathe slow. Convinced investigators he had not been gone long. Someone had maintained those shells. Someone had carved the interior of the very tree Mara was found in. Tool marks indicated work no more than 3 to 5 years old. Reeve might have been alive the entire time Mara was missing. Might have been watching search teams from the trees. Might still be alive now. And if he wasn't just a wanderer. He was a builder, a caretaker. A man devoted to the hollow spaces beneath living bark. A man who believed trees could hold people the way lungs hold air. The Hollow Man. In early December 2023, after weeks of combing the Uncompahgre backcountry, after dozens of hollow trees were mapped, after Reeve's name re-entered Colorado law enforcement vocabulary for the first time in 25 years, a faint heat signature appeared on a drone sweep near a narrow ravine 3 miles from where Mara was found. It wasn't strong enough to indicate a campfire, not quite human level, more like residual warmth, the kind left behind when someone rises from a sleeping place moments before. The search team followed the scan at dawn. The ravine was steep, swallowed in shade even at mid-morning. Snow clung to the walls like white drapery. Halfway down, under a rock overhang, the agents found a small fire pit lined with stones. The ashes were still warm. Beside it, a low sleeping mat woven from bark fiber. And lying on the ground, half buried in snow, a tarnished brass ranger badge. The name on it, J. Reeve. Tracks led uphill through the pines. They were fresh and hours old. The pursuit team followed, weapons drawn, moving silently through the timber. They crested a ridge and spotted a figure near the tree line. A man, thin, stooped, draped in layered bark cloth like the victims, stood with his back to them, facing a massive old aspen. His hands were pressed against the trunk, slow, rhythmic strokes across the bark as if caressing its surface. When the agents announced themselves, the figure didn't run, didn't flinch, didn't turn. He simply lowered his arms and let them hang at his sides. When they approached, he exhaled softly, almost peacefully, and whispered, The shells will keep growing. You cannot stop a tree from remembering. It was Jonah Reeve, older, gaunter, but unmistakably alive. His hair was long, gray, matted, his skin weathered like old wood. He carried no pack, no tools, nothing except a small pouch at his hip, filled with thin, hand-carved instruments made from bone. He did not resist arrest. His pulse was steady, his expression calm. But when questioned, he offered no coherent answers, only phrases. She learned the curve. Stillness is breath. The shell grows the willing. The roots remember shapes. He spoke like a man rehearsing scripture, but the meaning was fractured. On his body, investigators found deep scars on his upper arms and chest, parallel lines identical to the scarring on Mara's skin. They concluded he had performed the same rituals on himself that he inflicted on his victims. Reeve was transported to Denver under heavy supervision, but the arrest did not bring closure. Because 3 days later, while investigators swept the ravine where Reeve had been standing, they found something far worse than tools or tracks. Behind the aspen that Reeve had been touching, the one he had stood before in almost reverential stillness, was a vertical seam in the bark, barely visible, just a thin line where the trunk bulged outward. When forestry technicians tapped it, the sound echoed hollow, a hidden chamber. Inside, after a slow, careful cut, they found a small cavity, smooth, curved, unmistakably carved, and within it, protected by decades of bark regrowth, lay the skeletal remains of a young adult, curled in the same contorted posture Mara had demonstrated in the clinic. The remains belonged to E. Bromley, missing since 1999. Reeve had been carving shells for over 30 years. Some victims had died within. Some had been sealed by the living tree itself. One had survived. Meanwhile, Mara's recovery progressed slowly but disturbingly. She no longer smiled constantly, but she curled herself into a tight oval whenever she slept, as if the shape of the shell had embedded itself into her bones. She refused blankets unless they were heavy, weighted, telling nurses, "Flat things don't close, flat things don't breathe." Sessions with trauma therapists revealed fragments of her captivity. She described waking inside the growing shell, unable to stand fully, forced to breathe in slow, measured intervals so she wouldn't waste oxygen. Reeve visited infrequently but always said the same thing: stillness is the second breath. The tree will hold you if you let it. He fed her sporadically. Water came from condensed moisture inside the trunk, scraped into a palm-shaped indentation he called the drinking hollow. When she cried, he pressed a finger to her lips and whispered, "Quiet roots grow strongest." But the most chilling detail came weeks into her treatment. She said she wasn't alone inside the forest. "There were others," she whispered, voice trembling. "He taught us how to curl, how to sleep without sound. Some shells had people in them when I arrived. Some didn't speak it anymore." Over the following months, search teams found 2 additional tree chambers with skeletal remains, confirmation of a long, hidden chain of victims stretching back through the forest like a buried anatomy. By January 2024, the FBI concluded the number of shells could reach 12 or more. Some might already be sealed by decades of growth, impossible to find without destroying healthy trees. The case was declared partially resolved, with Reeve facing multiple charges of kidnapping, homicide, and abuse of a corpse. But Reeve himself remained detached, almost serene. He spoke only in ritual fragments. When asked why he carved the shells, he gave a single answer, whispered with conviction: "People rot. Trees remember." He died in custody from cardiac failure in early spring, never offering explanation, never admitting guilt. His final words, spoken to a guard, were, "She smiled. That means the forest accepted her." The documentary's closing footage shows Mara Elling months later during an art therapy session. She sketches the San Juan Mountains with slow, controlled lines. No shells, no hollows, no trees with open ribs, just silhouettes of peaks lost in fog. When the therapist asks what she dreams about, Mara pauses, gripping the pencil tightly. Finally, she whispers, "I dream of being flat. I dream of lying on the earth. I dream of nothing curved." Her hands shake as she closes the sketchbook. Outside her window, an aspen sways in the wind, its bark rippling in soft vertical waves. She does not look at it. She hasn't looked at a tree since the day they found her. Because even now, 10 years after vanishing into the forest, oh, 10 years after curling inside a living trunk, she is certain of one thing. The shells never die. They wait.